we're going to disable your ability to unmute yourself, because if you happen to post something in the chat or you happen to come off a mute, you're going to show up on the recording, and we don't want that. We only want the speaker on there. So with that said, I'm going to throw it over to Sejia. I'm so excited for her to be sharing with us tonight. She's obviously been a long-term member of the Sober Tribe, just an absolute sober queen, and I don't want to take up any more of her time giving a lengthy introduction because we all know and love her. So let's give a warm welcome to Sejia, and it's all yours, sister. Take it away.
Thanks, Brad. My name is Sejia, and I am a grateful recovering alcoholic. I think for me, for those words to come out of my mouth were really painful at the beginning of sobriety. I laughed when I first heard someone say, I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. The thought that came through my mind was, what the hell could you possibly be grateful for to be an alcoholic? How in the world can that sentence come out of your mouth with those words in it? And I just want to say, I just pulled up the list of participants, and there's a woman in here who was there. You know, I'll preface this by saying, most of you have heard some part of my story, all of my story several times. And coming into tonight and I try to prepare myself with notes and, some kind of bullets so that I can stay somewhat on track. And I never do. I hit like the first bullet point and then I'm, like a squirrel down the track. So it's my story, regardless of how many times I tell it. It's still my story, and there's parts that come out that are different, just depending on which way it kind of goes for me, I guess. And again, as I was looking through the list, there's a woman on here who has known me since my very first day of sobriety. And I recently asked her if she would walk through the steps with me again. I've done them 4 times with sponsees and twice with the sponsor. My sobriety date is April 10th of 2015. So 5 weeks from today, as long as I keep doing this deal, day in and day out, the mind, body, and soul work for me, I will celebrate 6 years of sobriety, as long as and only if I keep doing this work. And I know that, and I know there's no freebies. I know that the next 35 days are one day at a time. But for me, it's a period of reflection. It allows me to look back at where I was exactly 6 years ago. This is kind of a squirrely time for me, which was really one of the main reasons when Daff asked if anyone would share. I shared in November with someone else. We each had 20 minutes or so to talk. But when she asked if someone would share, this is really, I don't know, an interesting time for me internally, mentally, psychologically, all of it, because it takes me back to where I was right before I got into sobriety. And the further away I get from my last drink, the more I remember it. I don't ever want to forget my last drink, because that's what keeps me sober today, is remembering that feeling, that pit of despair, that hopelessness, that terrified feeling that life could never get better, that I could never get better. And I feel like the second I lose that, I feel like the second I think I've got this has got me. You will never hear the words "I've got this" come out of my mouth in terms of sobriety ever, because I don't got this. This isn't a program I will ever graduate from. And I truly couldn't be more grateful for that. So my story, I'll tell a little bit about, again, I apologize. Most of you have heard my I knew that was going to happen. I couldn't turn my volume up and down. Sorry. So most of you have heard my story several times, but I grew up in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. I am the 5th of 6 girls. Yes, that means that one is younger than me. People say these things all the time. It's so funny to me. They always say, so you're the youngest. I'm like, no, there's 6 of us and I'm number 5. So there's one more. and no, there are no boys. And I think that that's an important part of my story, because for a long time growing up, I heard from people, oh, your parents must have been so upset that they got you when they wanted a boy. And same with my little sister. And, I never really thought about those things. I never really processed or worked through a lot of that childhood stuff until I came into recovery, mostly because I just drowned them out with alcohol for so long that I didn't have to deal with them. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to work through it, because I just numbed it all away. So I grew up in, I would say I always say it this way, a fairly normal household, as normal as having 7 women, 1 man, and 1 bathroom could be. We were on the Oprah show when I was in 8th grade because we had 1 bathroom, and we fought over clothes, and we used to have to rent clothes from each other. And so a lot of interesting things, I think, that I've been able to learn about myself, and kind of what brought me to where I am today, and what really took me down the path of really, I think, generational alcoholism. Growing up, I always heard that my dad was allergic to alcohol, and I truly did not know what that meant until I came into the rooms of AA and heard an allergy to alcohol and realized that that was what my dad had. So if you have read anything that I share, you know that I don't hide my recovery at all. I choose to recover out loud for a number of reasons, but mostly because I think deep down, I didn't ever know that my dad struggles from alcoholism. And he was a really good dad. He was my biggest cheerleader. He was my biggest supporter. He was 6'8". He would stand on the top bleacher of all of my basketball games and yell. And he got kicked out of games all the time. One of the refs, who was just a family favorite, walked over to him and gave him a shirt and a whistle and said, "You think you can do better here?" And being the 5th of 6 girls, I kind of had to follow, I think, more on myself, but I had to follow this reputation that they all kind of created for our family. So as a freshman, I had 2 sisters who were a junior and senior, and I would hear, "Oh, you're one of the Nelsons. Oh, you're Amy's sister. Oh, you're..." So I never really felt like I had my own identity until they graduated and I was in high school alone. And I think what I've learned through a lot of work with counselors and with sponsors is that really learning who I was and my identity played a huge role in my alcoholism, a huge role in just continuing to numb those feelings away. Obviously, I have a unique name. I learned about 3 years ago. So I was about 2.5 years sober, and I learned that I was named after my dad. I was the only one that he got to name. And I was named after a friend of his who he met in AA. And I don't know why my mom never told me that before. That's not my inventory to take. She and my dad divorced in 2004. And it was really difficult for me. I had a really great relationship with my dad. I always have. And I had a really great relationship with my mom. And I felt like I was in the middle of that for a long time. So again, I think there wasn't any real family drama stuff other than, 6 girls pulling each other's hair and fighting and, punching through glass windows and doors and those kinds of things. So nothing really traumatic, except that we didn't talk about things. We didn't deal with things. Things were swept under the rug. Conflict wasn't dealt with. And I think that helped form how I would proceed with things. So fast forward a little bit, I moved to Denver in August of 2014, and my sobriety date is 8 months later. And I always share that I think that it was an unintentional, intentional geographic. And the further that I get away from that, the more I'm able to see that I think I really believed that if I moved, if I relocated from my family, that all of my problems, everything would just stay there. And obviously that's not what happens. But when we moved to Denver, I was alone. I was totally isolated. My older two kids, I have 3 kids. When I came into the rooms of AA, my oldest was 13, my daughter was 10, was 9, and my youngest was 4. So they have really grown up in this deal with me, especially my youngest. He will tell people, and again, if you follow me at all, you've seen me share about him. We just have a great relationship, but we didn't before. And when I was talking with my mom yesterday about sharing tonight, she said, what do you usually talk about? And I think she's more asking, like, am I divulging family secrets or something like that? But she could listen to any of the talks that I've given, and she hasn't. So I just shared with her, that I try to share less about my past, less of the drunkalog, because when I came into sobriety, that stuff didn't keep me sober. I didn't need to hear it. I didn't need to hear pissing matches between people saying, well, I drank this much and I did this much and I've been arrested. I don't care. That stuff isn't what keeps me sober today. And it sure as hell wouldn't have kept me sober at the very beginning. What I need to hear still is the continued strength and hope part. I don't need the experience. I cringe whenever people say, oh, would you come and qualify? And I know that that's meant to be used as kind of an old school term of sharing your story or sharing your, experience, strength, and hope. But I don't ever want to feel like I have to qualify my place in these rooms. I know that I've earned my seat, and I really struggled when I first came in because I had friends, especially back in Chicago, who would say, gosh, how bad were you? And, I really struggled with step one. I could absolutely admit that I was powerless. The second I came into the rooms, I could admit that I was powerless over alcohol. There wasn't a question, because I could never, ever just have one drink, ever. I didn't ever go into anything with the intention of having one. If I was going somewhere, I would have a couple before I would even go somewhere. I would pregame it, have a couple wherever we were, and then come home and get hammered. And, that's about the extent of what I share in terms of the experience part, because we all have war stories. The war stories aren't what are going to keep me here. They aren't the hopeful part of this journey for me. And when I came into the rooms, I was facing a divorce. It was in the middle of a divorce. I was fighting to keep my kids in the state. I was going through a parental responsibilities evaluator and a substance abuse evaluator. And I remember sitting down in a women's meeting, and there are a couple of those women who were there on here tonight. And I remember looking around the room, and I said, I just can't figure out this unmanageability piece. I just don't, I don't know where my life is unmanageable. And I remember one of the women saying, tell me how it is manageable. Tell me what's going on. You are losing your kids. You are losing your marriage. You have no job. You have no money. you are going through 2 different court-ordered evaluators, and you can't figure out the unmanageability piece. And it was like, as soon as she said that, I mean, I just felt stupid. Like, well, duh, obviously that's as unmanageable as I needed to get. And so that question kept coming up, especially when I would go back to Chicago. I went back to Chicago about 90 days sober. And the first time I was there, I had friends say to me who I used to drink with, you know, about a year earlier when we lived there. I had friends say, so how bad were you? If, you know, if you have to go through court, or if we have to give a letter for court, how bad were you? And finally, I think what it came to for me was that I was as bad as I needed to get in order to want to get better. My bottom didn't have to look like anyone else's. The elevator floor I got off on didn't have to be the same as anyone else's. I didn't have to go as low as anyone else, and I didn't have to be as high as anyone else in order to want better. And that was as simple as I needed to make it. What I've learned, you know, I've learned a million things in sobriety so far, but one of the main things I've learned is that I sat in the rooms, especially in the first 3 weeks, and just compared myself to everyone around me, looked at all of the differences. I didn't do that. I didn't go that far. I didn't lose that. And then I heard page 17. It's my favorite page in the big book. I have a lot of favorite pages in the big book, and there's a man in one of my home groups who will say, now this is my favorite reading every time he reads, and it's always something different. So that's one of my favorite pages, but it talks about how we are all from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different everything, you know, if we are people who normally would not mix. And that's true. I mean, even looking around this room, you look at the people in this room and think, so the only other place I would usually talk to half the people who are sitting in an AA room with me would be at a bar. And what I learned really quickly, and I'm so grateful that I did, is that the second I stopped looking for the differences and really looking for the similarities, looking around and listening and shutting my mouth and listening for what other people had to share, I realized that it didn't matter how we all got there, but that the common solution was recovery. The common solution was, I want a life without drinking, and not just not drinking, but living in recovery. And so when I started to really do the work at the beginning of sobriety, you know, I remember a woman said to me, if you want to find out who your friends are, get sober. And what I learned a little bit beyond that is, if you want to learn who your friends are in sobriety, set boundaries. Because the second I started setting boundaries, I lost a lot of people because I didn't have boundaries before. I was a doormat for whatever needed to happen. And the second I got sober, I realized I didn't need to be that still in sobriety. And, you know, it was even more difficult going through the steps the first time, feeling like I needed to make amends to people. And at the same time, not being passive about it. One thing that, you know, I think one thing I get asked a lot, or people will, I'll have conversations with people a lot about, is how do you stay sober through something really difficult? And, you know, honestly, in my first 3 years of sobriety, I think I went through some of the most difficult life things I've ever gone through. You know, again, I've shared a million times, my dad died 5 days before I had a year of sobriety. I had just pulled into the gym parking lot. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, and I had a call from the Milwaukee Sheriff's Department, and I had just missed the call because I still had my phone on silent. And when I got out, I grabbed my phone to get out, and I saw that I missed it. Before I even called back, before I even listened to the voicemail, I knew what it was. I just knew, like I could feel it in my chest. And So I called them back. They're an hour ahead. So I called back. They answered right away. I said, I just want to know if he was sober. And the sheriff was like, what? And I could hear it in his voice. He was kind of like, okay, I don't know. Here's the medical examiner's number. Give her a call whenever she opens. So it's about, 6:15 Chicago time. So I called again, the medical examiner, and I said, I just wanted to know if he was sober. And she said, actually, we just finished running toxicology reports and all of that. And he was. Why do you ask? And as soon as she said that, it was like, then I could start crying. And it was like everything let out of me. And, I don't know how else to explain it, but I feel like it was at that moment where I finally, something clicked with me. Like, I never talked to my dad about sobriety, not one time. He didn't even know that I was sober. He cut off communication with all of my sisters and I, like July, right before I moved to Denver. So he never even knew that I was sober. And I never knew that he was sober, really. I just knew that he was allergic, and I knew that he didn't drink. And so that morning I called into work, got my kids to school, and I went to the place where I knew I felt the most comfortable and where I needed to be. And it was a noon meeting up in Boulder. It was a meeting that I went to about 4 or 5 times a week. And I sat there and just cried the entire meeting because I knew that that's where I needed to be. I knew that I was with people who understood me, and I knew I remember people telling me, just don't drink over it. And especially after the memorial, and I went back to Chicago. Only me and 2 other sisters participated in his service. And I was the first one up to his apartment, and I went in there alone, and that was where he died. And they think that he had been dead for about 2.5 weeks when someone called and did a well-being check on him. So I should not have gone in there alone, but I'm not really a good listener sometimes. So I thought I knew what was best for me. It was 11 o'clock at night. I had just flown in, and I drove 3 hours straight up from the airport to my dad's in Milwaukee. And I wanted to be there. I just wanted to get all I wanted were his books. I knew he had books. So I went in, grabbed his big books, grabbed as much as I could, honestly, without breathing. I couldn't breathe in there. And I went over to the sheriff's station, and he had 2 guns that I had to claim, and, some other things. And he had, they had his wallet. So I had to get his wallet. And there was a note that I had written him like 4 years earlier, tucked in his wallet, with a $2 bill and a $100 bill. And when I was little, he used to show me those, and he told me, just always hang on to this kind of thing, these little things that keep in your wallet. And, so I did. So I had always kept that stuff in my wallet. So when I got back to my mom's that night, I left everything outside because it all stank. And it was my dad's stuff. I wanted to be respectful of her. So I picked up his 2nd edition big book, and I said, can you believe I found this? And as soon as I picked it up, something fell out. I picked up what fell out and opened it. And on the front, it said, whenever you're going through a hard time or it feels like you can't calm the storm, just know that I'm here for you. And I opened the card, and in it said, I love you very much, friend. Love, Sejia. And it was the first time that I'd ever seen this woman's handwriting. And I just looked up at my mom, and she said, I think that's for you. And, I share that part, and I share that almost every time I talk, because I was just a year sober, and it had felt like it had already been, 5 years of a new lifetime, really. Because I went through that list, that not really written down list of things you shouldn't do in early sobriety. And I think I went through it and checked everything off the list, get out of a relationship, move, I started back to school. I started a new job. Just all of these things that I knew I shouldn't do, but I knew better. So, I figured, why not? And most of those things did not work out, probably because I wasn't supposed to do them in the first place. But what I did get out of those was a lesson to listen to people who had more wisdom than I did. So when after my dad died, I that was really about the time when I really started to get involved in service. And at about 1.5 years sober, someone asked me to share my story up at a rehab, and I said no. And she said, okay, can you just think about it for a minute and call me back? So I called a friend in recovery and I said, she wants me to share and I don't even have anything to say. So I told her no. And the woman who I talked to said, of course you have something to say. You have your story to share. It doesn't matter what you think is going to be beneficial to someone else. It's not up to you to figure it out. You don't say no. So call her back and tell her you'll be there. And right about that time, my oldest started to get in trouble. Just get over and over for about 3 years. And at one point he was missing. He was gone for 72 hours. And I slept in my car and drove around town looking for him. And I was so convinced that I was going to find him dead somewhere. Honestly, that just kept coming. I couldn't even close my eyes sitting in my car because all I kept thinking was, I'm going to find him dead. So I just kept calling people. I kept reaching out. I opened my phone and I called people who gave me their number and said, call me whenever you need something. So I did. So I listened. So I did what people told me to do at the very beginning. And, surprisingly, that's what worked. One thing that I think always comes to mind when I share is I didn't really start sharing openly about sobriety until I was about 2.5 years sober. I don't know why. I think I was afraid to get people's reactions, to hear what other people would say, someone said, what if someone finds out that you are an alcoholic? And I think that was when someone asked me that question, it was like that turning point for me where I realized I don't fit that stigma. I don't fit that person that people picture. And I know that because I had a perception of what an alcoholic was. And what I've learned in the last almost 71 months is that when I share my story, it opens the door for other people to feel safe enough to talk with me about their own story. And it also allows them to feel less shame in what their own story is, regardless of what they choose to share with me or not. So a big part of recovery for me has been doing the work, doing the steps. I did I served in the women's prison ministry for a little while where we would go in and meet with women. And what I'm realizing the longer that I'm doing this deal is that as soon as I get out of myself, as soon as I make myself be of service to others, it immediately takes whatever is going on with me out of the picture. And it allows me to get out of myself and to help someone else who is struggling more than I am. Because the problems I have today don't even could never compare to what I had going on when I was still drinking. There isn't a day today that could even compare truly to when I was drinking. One of the biggest things that I share today, and I think is most hopeful for me, is that when I came in, I didn't have I didn't have relationships that were true and genuine. I just didn't. I didn't have relationships that were meaningful and deep and real. I had surface level relationships because I wouldn't let people get close enough to me to get deep. I didn't want to get hurt. I didn't want to allow you in because I didn't know who I really was. And when I came into sobriety and really started doing the work, I share a lot about being in here. I cannot be in here and be in recovery for anything other than myself and my own well-being. And that's the bottom line. I can't be in here for my kids. I can't be in here for my mom. I can't be in here for my stepdad who texts me every single morning. I can't stay sober for anything or anyone but myself, because the second that I put any of those things above my sobriety anyway, I'm going to lose them. And I know that. I know that today. I know that every single thing is a gift because of the work I've done in recovery. I know that nothing I have in my life today would be here if I wasn't sober. And the only way I'm going to stay here and stay sober and stay on this journey of recovery is when I continue to do this work. I think what keeps me sober, the hope part, what keeps me sober today is steps 10, 11, and 12 every day, doing the nightly inventory, emailing it to friends, writing it down, journaling. I somehow fell into this routine where I'm up. My youngest would say at the crack of dawn. I don't know where he came up with that, but he couldn't say crack for the life of him. So he'd say, "You're up at the crack of dawn." And that's really what I do. But my day starts best when I start my day in quiet, when my alarm goes off and I'm in quiet time, reading, journaling, getting to the gym, and then I'm able to be of service to other people. Again, I share all the time. It's the same thing, that I have to put the oxygen mask on myself first so that I can take care of anyone else and everyone else and everything else that's going on in life. I won't be any good to anyone else if I don't care for myself first. And that was something that was really hard to learn in early sobriety, but I can't give away what I don't have. So if I don't have peace and serenity and happiness and joyfulness and love and calm and serenity, I can't give any of that away. And the only way I can attain those things is by continually doing this work. And part of that for me is doing 10, 11, and 12. 11, sitting in prayer and meditation every day. I couldn't meditate for longer than like 30 seconds for the longest time. I would sit and all of a sudden I would look around, or I would sit and I would close my eyes for a second and open one. I thought I heard something. I just couldn't do it. And I remember talking with a woman who said, "Why are you putting so much pressure on yourself to do this right? What does right look like? Your kind of right in terms of meditation, just sit and do it quietly. Just sit. If it's for 15 seconds, great. Then do 15 more seconds tomorrow." And now what I've learned is that one of the greatest rewards of doing this work every single day is that I can sit with myself and I can sit quietly and be comfortable with me. And I couldn't ever do that. I didn't know who I was when I came in here. And what I've learned is that the more work I do, the more I peel back, the more I become who I think I was supposed to be all along. She was always under there. I had just poured poison on top for so long that it took a long time to really undo that and figure out who I really am and who do I want to be. I I was about a month sober, and I remember saying to someone, is this really how this is supposed to be? Because I'm miserable. I don't want to go to bed every night, you know, closing my eyes and saying, oh, thank God I stayed. Thank you. I'm so glad I stayed sober today. I didn't want to do that. That wasn't living for me. It was like as miserable as life was, just without alcohol added. And after I had that conversation with her, it like dawned on me that what I really wanted was to live a life in recovery. I didn't want to just white knuckle sobriety. And the more I get out of myself, the more I realize that as I learn and grow and continually remain teachable and continually be vulnerable and honest and open about my story, the more other people will share theirs with me too, and theirs with other people, and own and accept their own story. And, I was talking with a friend this morning, just through text, and in the last week, I have gotten about 5 messages from high school friends back in the Chicago area. I don't know what something must have happened, because all of a sudden I've never gotten this many messages from high school friends in the last 5.5 years. And all of them are saying either I am in sobriety and I'm really glad to hear that you are, or I'm really struggling. Can you help me? And, after I get those messages, I can't even explain what a humbling feeling it is that I get to be of service today. People ask me for help. 5.5 years ago, people wouldn't ask me to watch their dog. And now I get to help walk through sobriety with people. I mean, when I came in here and heard people laughing and heard people say, just stick around till the miracle happens. And then other people say, and then just stay because more miracles will happen. I just thought, or when people would celebrate a year or 2 years, I thought it was just such bullshit. Nobody could stay sober for a year. No one could stay sober for 2 years or 20 or whatever people were saying. And honestly, sitting here today, 4 days away from 71 months of sobriety, I don't even have words for that, because I never believed that, honestly, when I came in here, that I could stay sober for this long. I didn't plan on being sober when I came in here. I planned to learn how to drink like a normal person. And instead, what I learned was how to live without drinking being part of who I am. Not just not drinking, but living without drinking and living without it even being a thought. And when I went through all of that really tough life stuff, coming out the other side and not just saying, oh my gosh, I didn't drink over that, but being able to say, I worked through those things without alcohol even being a thought. I worked through them because I felt my way through them. And, there are so many gifts in this program. There are so many gifts in sobriety in general. And over the last year, no one could have anticipated where from a year ago right now, before everything shut down. I don't think anyone could anticipate where we would be right now, that we would be sitting on a Zoom meeting from Canada to Houston to the West Coast to the East. And what I have learned and what I have taken away from the last year is that page 417 is still right. Acceptance is still the answer to all my problems today. And I could choose to be miserable and pissed off that we all have to sit on Zoom instead of sitting face to face, or I can turn it around and be so grateful that I can sit in a car and be on Zoom and get to be of service tonight, because I choose to do this work every single day, regardless of how easy or how hard life gets. There isn't a thing that a drink will ever make better for me today. I know that. I wholeheartedly believe that. And I continually play the tape forward, because drinking was not my problem towards the end. It was my solution to all my problems. And when I started to really do that work and still do this work, I have learned that I don't need it to be my solution anymore. I have a whole toolbox. I have a whole phone book of people that I can call. I just have to be willing to pick up the phone, to open that toolbox, to figure out what's going to work. And you know what? Sometimes nothing works. Sometimes I go through that toolbox and journal and read and pray and call and sit and cry and sleep, and nothing works. And so, I think someone on these meetings shared once, sometimes you just have to grab some ice cream and Netflix and call it a night, and know that tomorrow is a new day. And so I think for me, I'll wrap this up, and I just want to say, one of the biggest lessons I've come away with in the last couple of months is that regardless of where we are on this journey, how you feel like you're struggling or feel like you're alone, it's just a thought, because none of us are alone. We really are in this together. And if you haven't connected with people yet, there's a whole list of us willing to help. I will answer my phone anytime. I still answer phone calls at 2 a.m. from people needing help, because people answered the phone for me at 2 a.m. when I needed help. And I'll never stop sharing my story. I'll never stop recovering out loud, because that's what keeps me sober today. And if just one person hears one little thing that keeps them going today, and that's all I need. That's all I need to know that I'm on the right path still. And no matter how many days I have, it's the work I do every day that really matters. So I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for letting me share.